Elena asked for a raise on a Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, 3 calendar invites had vanished. Her name was missing from the product roadmap document, and her manager had sent a short message that said, "We're going to simplify your lane for the next quarter." At first, it sounded almost helpful. Elena was a customer insights analyst at a mid-sized software company in Chicago. She was 32, good at her job, and not especially loud about it. For the past year, she had been doing the work that sat between support, product, and sales, spotting patterns in customer complaints, turning them into feature requests, and explaining those patterns in meetings with senior leadership. Her raise request had not been emotional. She brought examples, market salary ranges, and a list of responsibilities she had taken on since her last review. Her manager, Dan, nodded through most of it and said, "This is good context. Let me think about the right way to position it." That sentence stayed in her head because it sounded positive. Not a yes, but not a no. Then the next morning, the work that supported her raise request started disappearing. The harmless explanation was easy to believe. Maybe Dan really was trying to reduce her workload. Maybe the team was reorganizing. Maybe he wanted to protect her from burnout. Companies do shift responsibilities all the time, and managers often use phrases like focus and alignment when they're moving pieces around. But one small detail didn't fit. The roadmap meeting was not canceled. Elena was just removed from it. She found out because a coworker, Evan, messaged her, "Are you still sending the churn notes before today's roadmap sync, or is that going through me now?" Elena stared at the message. Evan had never owned the churn analysis. He presented sometimes, but the underlying work came from her dashboards, her interviews, and her weekly summaries. She asked Dan if the invite removal was an accident. He replied 11 minutes later, "Not an accident. Just streamlining communication." That closed one question. It wasn't a scheduling mistake, but it opened a bigger one. Why would asking for a raise make her less visible? 2 days later, the second clue appeared in the shared project tracker. A column called DRI, meaning Directly Responsible Individual, had been updated. For 6 months, Elena's name had been beside customer churn themes. Now it said Evan. Next to her name was a new entry, Support Ticket Categorization. That sounded close to her old work, but it was not the same work. One role shaped product decisions. The other cleaned the data before decisions were made. This is where a lot of employees misread what's happening. They focus only on workload. But in many corporate jobs, pay and promotion are tied less to how busy you are and more to the scope of what the company can prove you own. A compensation team may not know who had the original idea or who stayed late fixing the analysis. They look at job level, impact, decision-making authority, and whether leadership sees the work attached to your name. Elena's problem was not that senior leaders disliked her work. Most of them had stopped seeing it attached to her. The stakes changed during a Thursday one-on-one. Dan told her the raise was not off the table, but that they needed to stabilize expectations before discussing compensation. Then he shared a revised role summary. It described Elena as supporting customer operations reporting. It did not mention product strategy, executive readouts, churn analysis ownership, or cross-functional planning. Elena asked carefully, "Is this a temporary coverage change?" Dan said, "Let's not get caught up in labels." That was the line that made her start saving documents. Not secretly recording conversations, not taking confidential files, just keeping lawful copies of things she was allowed to access. Old project trackers, prior performance feedback, meeting agendas, and the raise document she had sent. She also began sending short recaps after conversations. Nothing aggressive. Just confirm, my roadmap meeting attendance has ended. Evan will present churn themes, and my current focus is ticket categorization through Q2. Dan did not respond to the first recap. He responded to the second with, "Yes, that's accurate for now." The reversal came a week later, from HR. Elena had asked for a compensation follow-up, and an HR business partner joined the call. HR said they had reviewed her role and determined that her current responsibilities aligned with her existing salary band. Elena asked which responsibilities they reviewed. The HR partner pulled up a document titled, Role Clarification, Customer Insights Analyst. It had been submitted the same night Elena asked for a raise. That changed the whole story. The job had not changed because HR evaluated her raise request and then made a neutral adjustment. Dan had changed the written version of her job before HR reviewed it. The raise request had forced a question he did not want to answer. If Elena was truly owning product-level analysis, why was she still paid and leveled like a support analyst? So he solved the problem in the cheapest possible way. He didn't need to argue that her work had no value. He just needed to move the visible, higher-scope parts to someone else and redefine Elena's role around the lower-scope tasks left behind. That does not require a cartoon villain. Dan may have been under budget pressure. He may have believed Evan was better in executive meetings. He may have wanted to avoid admitting he had let Elena operate above level without promoting her. But the pattern mattered more than his private motive. The moment Elena asked to be paid for expanded responsibilities, those responsibilities were detached from her. Elena handled it by staying factual. She did not accuse Dan of retaliation in the meeting. She asked HR to compare the new role clarification with her previous performance review, the roadmap tracker history, and the meetings where she had been listed as owner. She asked for written promotion criteria and whether regaining ownership of churn analysis would be considered higher-level work. That question forced precision. 2 weeks later, HR did not grant the full raise, but they did correct the role summary, restore her as co-owner of the churn analysis, and set a formal review date tied to measurable scope. Elena also started interviewing internally, because she had learned something important. A manager who can erase your scope can also erase your case for advancement. The mystery was never just why her job changed overnight. It was why it changed in exactly the places that proved she deserved more. The missing calendar invites mattered. The rewritten tracker mattered. The vague phrase "simplify your lane" mattered. And the role clarification submitted the same night as her raise request explained why everything had moved so fast. If something similar happens to you, don't start with a dramatic accusation. Start with a clear record. Confirm what changed, ask whether it is temporary or permanent, connect your responsibilities to measurable promotion or pay criteria, and keep appropriate copies of your own work history. If the change touches protected issues like pay equity, discrimination, medical leave, or retaliation concerns, get qualified guidance before deciding your next move. Elena's raise request did not fail because she asked badly. It exposed that her company had been benefiting from a bigger job than the one written on paper. And that next morning message, the one about simplifying her lane, meant something very different by the end. It was not a favor. It was the first draft of a smaller version of her career. Have you ever seen someone's responsibilities shrink right after they asked for more money or a promotion? And if your work was suddenly reassigned, what document would prove it used to belong to you?